Live from Sydney now, James Cullen, the Senior Director of Government Relations at Cornerstone Group. Let's talk reflections. Budget reflections, James. What do you make of it?
Morning, Pete. Look, I think it's basically what we thought it would be a couple of weeks out, right? Like, you know, ultimately lower debt and deficit than what they'd forecast previously, a massive budget improvement of over $100 billion, and the Treasurer had been flagging that most of that would be spent, and that's exactly what he's brought forward. I think it's prudent. I mean, that's obviously clearly what, you know, economists are supporting at the moment. We've got a closed economy in parts. We're going to have another 12 months of at least of no international travel, focusing on the vaccine rollout. There's going to be parts of the economy which continue to do it tough. We know there's an issue with wages growth. So
that's
spending more money to get that unemployment down. Yeah, that's right. And that's where the action's at. So, look, overall, I think it's the right budget for the right time. And many people are calling it a Labor budget because they're focusing on spending in some areas that Labor's been talking about too.
So what does Labor do here? I mean, I was chatting to Jim about this a short time ago, and I asked if Labor's boxed in here because they can't go under in terms of spending, and they can't really go much higher because then that arouses suspicions. So what's the play?
Yeah, like it's right. It's a tough one, isn't it? Look, I think overall it's finding what we call points of difference, Pete. So there'll be no doubt there'll be a very strong critique tonight from Mr Albanese of things like the COVID management, the vaccine rollout, the fact that international travel is so far off. That's going to have impacts on the economy. They're clearly targeting wages growth. The budget shows more or less a forecast cut in real wages, so that'll get a focus and attention. So it's going to be, I think, a strong critique of the government and the government's handling of COVID. But then you'd expect Labor to pick perhaps a few new areas, and they've already flagged in today's media a focus on startups and entrepreneurs. That's a good little, like a low-cost way of coming up with a point of difference with the government. But I would expect, given what the leader's been talking about and the government as well, to be something on housing as well. It's been a very strong and abiding interest for the Leader of the Opposition, and it goes to his story in terms of how he grew up and what's important to him as well. So I think we want to hear a little bit more tonight about the Leader of the Opposition and his story as well.
Okay, and what about structural budget balance? You've got some charts, you've got some papers to show us, James. Explain what they are.
Look, it's Christmas time for economists and geeks with the budget papers, Pete. So please indulge me. Look, this is a really important chart in budget paper one, and the reason why this is an important one is the Treasurer of the day can't really play around with this. So when you strip out the political rhetoric when it comes to the health of the budget, this kind of chart is where you're left with. And basically what the structural budget balance tells you is when you strip out the one-off factors, so the stimulus spending, which of course the government's been much vaunted, what are you left with? And I suppose what this particular chart's showing us is for the medium term, over the next decade, we have the budget in a structural deficit. And I suppose why that's important is, and why I suppose it's a concern is that we've got this worst of both worlds where on the spending side, governments are continuing to bake in structural spends, and we've seen that with this budget with childcare and aged care, but there's no new revenue measures or offsets, and we've got a weak and an eroding tax and revenue base as it stands. So, look, I suppose while this budget is good for the times and what the economy needs, there are going to be more difficult decisions down the track because we know that low interest rates aren't here forever. So at some point in the future, the debt problem could start to really come to the fore.
And then you're going to need tax rises to come into play, right?
Well, this is right, and then the political equation comes back into it too. So we could see the next election where Labor's sort of claiming that, you know, the government might go and try and do a 2014 budget again after the election and perhaps go for spending cuts, with the government saying that Labor will look at tax increases. The bottom line is that structural budget deficit, neither side is just going to let that go. Down the track, there's going to be some difficult decisions coming. And so there should be. It's an opportunity to reform and to sort of better target spending as well. It's just interesting that this budget, clearly neither side wants to talk about the budget repair challenge. But I can tell you, Pete, it's a challenge which is definitely coming down the track at us.
Well, it's a lot of talk. The spotlight now seems to be on those stage 3 tax cuts. They're a way off. They're not legislated to come for a while yet. But whether they go ahead or not, it's very doubtful. I mean, even Chris Richardson saying this morning that he reckons it's toast.
Yeah, look, isn't it interesting that economists are now starting to weigh in to really focus on that? I mean, when they start in 24, 25, I think I seem to recall the cost is about $20 billion a year, just by itself. And we know the benefits of stage 3 overwhelmingly go to high income earners. So the politics and the economics of it, is that sustainable to take on at that particular point in time? When the government first rolled out those stage 3 tax cuts years ago, the budget trajectory was different. It was pre-COVID. So does COVID give an opportunity for both sides of politics to reevaluate what's important? Yeah, and now stage 3 income tax cuts come into it. And Labor's going to take a position on this to the next election now. So it's going to be really interesting to sort of see how that one plays out.
All right, James Cullen, good to chat. We'll talk to you soon.